Welcome to the Emerge Collaborative podcast. I'm Falon.
And I'm Rachel.
Together, we share more than 2 decades of experience working with young adults on college campuses.
So on this podcast, we're engaging the questions we hear in our ministry to better equip those who care for the emerging adults in their lives.
We are here today with Joel Foster. Joel has been a youth minister working with teens and their spiritual development for more than a decade. He holds a master's degree in ministry. Thank you so much for being here, Joel. We're excited to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So, Joel, we're talking today about the gap in faith development and spiritual development in between high school and college. And so we've titled it, Why Do I Feel So Unprepared for Faith in College When I Spent the Last 4 Years in Youth Group? Why is there that divide between students graduating high school, even if they've been in church their entire life, and then they get to college and they feel pretty under-equipped for their faith?
I think one of the major reasons for that is that youth ministries tend to exist in a silo that are trying to create carbon copies of the current adult members rather than setting them up for an authentic and individual expression of their faith. I don't think that individuality is the purpose of faith, but I do think if we can see youth ministries and the programs that they're cultivating, the spiritual formation that they're cultivating as like contributing to the long-term development of a kid rather than just this kid should look like a typical worshiper at insert name of church here. That's part of the issue is that kids then get away from that community and they don't fit. They feel like they don't fit or belong in the different spiritual bubbles that they end up in. The questions that come up are not within the community that they were raised in, so on and so forth. And I think they get kind of lost in that wash or that change and they're not prepped at all for it. If that makes sense.
It does. So it's almost kind of like we're preparing teens not to actually go and experience other faith contexts, which most of them do if they're going to be college bound, but instead we're just kind of creating an echo chamber within our own communities.
And essentially just passing on the faith of the ones before us without much thought of what it might look like for genuine expression in the different contexts that we're going off into.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
So, Joel, all of us have ministered together, you, me, and Rachel, and we have all noticed in our ministries that oftentimes college students come into college and they have often grown up in church, but they often have a lot of questions and struggles with their faith and with the Bible and with God. What is up with that gap between graduating high school, even someone who's been in church their whole life and in youth group for the last 4 years, and they come to college and they still don't really know what's going on with their faith?
What would you say is often missing from youth ministry that college life then tends to expose?
I think youth ministry is missing a lot. I think one of the major ones is listening to the students, which seems obvious, but I think a lot of youth ministers feel the pressure to answer to their leadership team, the parents, the denominational structure that they're a part of if they have that. And there's very little emphasis on listening to the needs, the actual needs spiritually of the student, of the youth group member. And so then when kids get to college and are getting to wrestle with the things that have been bubbling up the whole time and without kind of the structure or person over them to squash some things down, that stuff bubbles up. And then there's often no structure or oftentimes I think no community that they've been rooted in to help them process it the whole time.
Yeah.
So they kind of are floundering, I feel like, when their youth minister could have done that heavy lifting with them, given them tools, given them a model of what it looks like to wrestle with their faith and whatnot. But the youth ministers are more concerned about making sure that the kids keep coming to church and that their parents are happy with the job that they're doing more than what the kid might actually need.
It sounds like that the emphasis on fun and prescriptive answers kind of sets students up for a fragile faith.
Yeah, I would agree. I think youth ministers see themselves or are hired sometimes to be the CEOs of fun or like a cruise ship director. Like that's a very classic. Like I think if you got fired from a youth ministry job, that's what you could go do is like a used car salesman or a cruise ship director. And yeah, that's what they show up. And the idea is like if church is fun enough, flashy enough, exciting enough, then kids show up. But then when life hits the fan, the diagnosis rolls in, the grandparent dies, you don't make the sports team because of an injury that now ruined what you wanted to do in college. That faith is super fragile because that part of life's not fun.
Yeah.
Right.
When I was in high school, I mean, attending youth group was like fantastic, fun explosion. I do not remember anything that was taught or anything. I just remember like a Velcro wall.
Yeah, that checks out.
Yeah. But I couldn't tell you what was going on there spiritually. So that resonates with my experience. And I'd imagine with many listeners as well, if they were in that kind of.
Yeah. The stereotype,
space.
right, is that youth ministers do nothing but eat pizza and play games with kids. And that's like kind of the spirituality a lot of youth ministers are giving their kids. I think it's like Domino's pizza when like you could be giving them substantial, like, I don't know, farm to table meal. Like you could like deeply form their understanding of God in the world and God in their own lives. But what is wanted a lot of times is the cheap cardboard box pizza.
What is the misdefinition of success in youth ministry? And I would say sometimes in college ministries as well, that's leading to this gap. And what would be better metrics of quote unquote success?
Anytime that we think that numbers matter, it's a missed metric of success. How do you then measure something that's not numerical is harder, I think, context to context. One time a youth minister told me that the secret to successful youth ministry was relationships. And I was like, well, no, duh. Like,
Right.
obviously. But, right, I think the whole, like, I don't know exactly when, but in the 90s in the U.S. politics, when they were talking about porn, and the senator was like, well, I don't know how to define porn, but when I see it, I know what it is. Yeah, whatever it is. Like, I feel like that's success in youth ministry.
I know it when I see it.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know how to tell a youth minister, hey, you're like, these are the things to look for, but I know how to tell a youth minister, you're doing a great job, keep going. Right? Like, because I see the way that they listen and love their kids. I see the way the students react to the different ebbs and flows of life. I see things like resilience being built up in those students, albeit like even when they're like 14 and can't handle things super well, right? They respond differently than the 14-year-old at the mega church that is like, oh, my faith is built on a bounce house, and now the bounce house is gone, and my friends left me, and my parents are getting a divorce, and like, I think God doesn't exist anymore. Blanket statement like that. I think success has to be built on the relationships that youth ministers are actively cultivating, which goes back to mentioning, like, I don't think youth ministers are listening to their kids. And I think kids aren't sharing openly with their youth ministers, and it's this like give and take both ways.
Yeah.
Would you say that there's an underestimation of what teens can handle in their spiritual lives?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we water down or dumb down spirituality, faith, expectations on teens all the time. We water down the faith stuff, but then we've been, for the last, I don't know, maybe 20 years or so, building up and boistering, if that's the right word, all the other expectations, right? So we've watered down the expectations of what they can handle spiritually. All the while, we want the perfect student, the perfect athlete, the perfect daughter, the perfect son, perfect sibling, whatever. I have to have the perfect girlfriend, perfect boyfriend. So these expectations are building, but then and we tell kids, you have to give your all to school and give your all to sports and give your all to your family and give your all, and then somehow God's supposed to fit. And so then I think there's this shallow faith because they don't have room for, they don't have room for much more. Like, they're super busy. And so why take time to ask and answer questions when I'm just trying to survive, practice in school, and like, et cetera, right? The college checklist to get into the best university.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of college ministries that I have observed sometimes continue the fun focus of youth groups. And I've even heard college ministries reform by saying, like, we don't want to be a continuation of youth group. We want to actually like start real spiritual development now. But what happens in young adult spirituality post-college when youth groups and college ministries underestimate teens and emerging adults?
I think the faith life of those students ultimately crumbles. I think they find, well, that's not totally fair. I think students will find a spiritual community somewhere. I think the concern, and I'm not sure if that's the word I necessarily want, but I think the concern is that they will, like, students will not find it in the capital C church, the universal church. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, right? Like, if a graduated college student finds it at the bar and like is seen and known there, I'm okay with that. But I think we're missing out on a rich tradition when students believe that the only place they can be seen and known is the bar, the Pilates studio, right, like the local neighborhood only, rather than bringing those communities into a bigger system, a bigger tradition that is like rooted in a really like holistic view of love. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That does make sense.
So I think that's what we miss out on. I think college students like are like, okay, you don't take me or what I'm wondering about seriously. The people I do yoga with every week do. So that's where I'm going to go.
Yeah.
That's where I'll find community and meaning and purpose.
Right.
Because you didn't.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think we've done a decent job of diagnosing some of the issues that plague this transition and why youth ministry tends not to set students up for success. What do you do differently as a youth minister?
I'm just the best youth minister ever.
I mean, that makes sense to me.
Sorry, no,
no
that's
pizza.
not true. No, yeah, never pizza. Actually, no, we eat a ton of pizza still. I think I'm willing to try and fail. I think I'm willing to try hard things with students. And if they tell me that it's the worst thing they've ever done, for me to say, okay, we don't have to do this anymore. I think I intentionally ask them what they're interested in talking about, what are the questions they're wondering about. And sometimes that's not a direct, hey, what do you want to talk about in our Bible study? But it's because I've been sharing meals with them, hanging out in their homes, going to see them on their different extracurricular activities. And so I know that we should do a 6-week conversation around anxiety and stress and friendships, because I'm watching those pressures push on them. So I think I'm paying attention differently than other youth ministers tend to do. I don't think that's a unique gift. I think that's just something that youth ministers forget about when you're so busy planning the next game or the next fun event or the next camp or whatever. I think you forget that the purpose was to know kids as they are. And then I think I'm not afraid of like really old and quote unquote boring spiritual traditions, which is the accusation that I've received and I have gladly received, of wanting to do contemplative practice with students, and people saying, well, high school students don't want that because it's boring. And their response being, well, have you tried it? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, okay. Oh, great. Thank you for the advice. Thanks for the feedback. And then saying like, screw it, I'm going to try it anyway. And then 15 kids show up and sit in silence for 30 minutes. And they're like, wait, that was really cool. And you're like, oh yeah. There's like a long, beautiful tradition of stopping and breathing and recognizing that God's here with you. Cool. Welcome to the party. It's been going for 2,000 years.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to focus a little more on the transition from high school to college. There's no switch that flips between senior year of high school and freshman year of college, either in terms of personality, development, neurologically, anatomically, physiologically, but also spiritually too. There's a lot of continuity. And we know that those are really two different life stages. We can look especially at a freshman in high school to a senior in college, a graduating senior. And those 8 years, students change a lot. So what's happening developmentally in that transition, particularly from high school to college? And how can parents support their child's faith in particular in the transition from adolescence to adulthood, particularly without micromanaging or panicking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the two things that come to mind for me are beginning to welcome and making room for the ambiguity. So, right, developmentally, from middle school until the end of high school, you're really black and white and starting to just get some gray. Like we know from like the way that our brains are developing that that's happening, and that continues into college, right? And sometimes you get some college students who are a lot more black and white than others. Yeah. And then sometimes you get some adults who never leave the black and white, and they should for a little bit. But I think parents listening to their students' questions about life, not just faith, and sometimes choosing to respond with "I don't know," or "Let's talk about it," or let's bring in someone else," like so that the kids see that their parents don't have all the answers. I think that is big, because then students can begin to realize that to be a fully formed adult is not to have it all figured out. So that's the first one. The second one is to orient the family spirituality around the reality that the truest thing about us is that we're beloved, is a radical theology of affirmation, regardless of your belief of different political things that are happening in the world, right? Like that, the truest thing about your student and the things that make your student who they are is that they're loved by you and by God primarily, so that as they launch into what's next, they will find when stuff hits a fan, when people in college are mean, when their professors inevitably fail them at least once, that's not who they are. And so they sit with ambiguity better. And so when the questions of faith show up, they're not rattled, right? They're maybe like shook a little bit, but they're not like, oh my God, time to get rid of my faith. Like nothing makes sense anymore. They're like, okay, I can do this. Like to be a fully formed adult is not to have all the answers, and to be like, and even if I did have all the answers, or even when I don't, I'm still the like fully beloved as I am. So those to me are like the two things that parents could actively do. Part of that's just like affirming your kid every day. I'm proud of you. I love you. It's so cool to see the things that you do, that you love to do, going to their events, their sporting events, their extracurriculars, and just cheering them on, bringing in others to write letters of affirmation for them who are important in their life, grandparents, mentors, youth ministers, etc. Just like filling them into a web of like belovedness that they can't leave behind. Like it's too sticky to leave behind.
Yeah, I love that. When I was working at a university, I preached a sermon at a chapel once and called the sermon, God Will Still Love You If You Don't Get an A. And it was pretty surprising to me because it was early on in my time in college ministry, but it was surprising to me how many students wanted to come talk about that. And they were like, for real? And I was like, I mean, the way that I understand the Bible, especially because grades didn't exist back then. So like, I think you're good. But I think that I love the word you use, like the stickiness of it. I think that that's really meaningful as we think about that transition. I'm wondering if we could move that even more, like into the practical even more, of like, what advice would you give for pastors? And we can talk youth ministers, but also lead ministers too, setting the tone, children's ministry even, who want to set up teens for a strong, nuanced faith in college and like a thriving faith in young adulthood.
Yes, stop talking so much about death and things that are bad news. And it sounds super simple to say it that way, but like, so Meredith Miller just posted something about Jackie Hill Perry, who was like talking to all these like little kids about like, you deserve to die, you deserve to die, you deserve to die. And even at like the most recent camp that I was at, like I heard kids saying like, it's so great that God loves us because like really what we deserve is death and like punishment. Like that's how terrible we are. So it's so ingrained. So parents, pastors, children's ministers, especially, I think, to just begin to reframe and find the positives. And I'm not advocating for like a false positive spirituality, right? Because life is difficult and it's not fair to pretend that everything's good. But like, why do we focus on the parts of the story that are like the illness when we could be focusing on the resurrection, the healings, does that make sense? The restorations, like why do we focus on Jonah turning away from God when we could talk about how gracious God is towards the Ninevites? Like, and I just think like for pastors to stop, honestly, part of it is like the pastors don't believe it about themselves. So that'd be a good place to start is with therapy. And
shout out to therapy.
Maybe do that.
Huge fan.
Pastors out there, and like write a little affirmation for yourself. But like my youth group kids joke that like they'll leave youth group and the only thing they'll remember me saying is that the truest thing about you is that you're the beloved of God. And my response is, do you believe it yet? And they say no. And I go, okay, well, I'm going to keep saying it. And so it's hard. Like it's not a pastor saying one time in a sermon, God loves you completely. It's not the children's minister for one single Sunday singing Jesus loves you. It is the theme, the thread that has to be underneath everything that we do with kids, because it's so everything else. Like you want to be countercultural as a church. Like that's how you do it. It doesn't mean that you're a culture warrior. It means that you tell people that they're beloved, even when the rest of the world tells them that they're not. It means that nothing about them can separate them from the love of God, even when the world says you are only known by what you achieve. That's, to me, that's countercultural. So that's what I would tell pastors.
That also speaks to what you were talking about earlier of like not treating youth ministry like it's this lesser than subset. Because even as you were talking, I was like, that should be the through line for all of the ministries, not just youth ministry. I'm like, wait a minute. That needs to permeate the entirety of the church culture. And you're right. It often doesn't. And so then the messages of where your worth lies are certainly drowning out anything that would come from Scripture.
And it's hard work for parents to tell their kids they're the beloved if they don't believe it about themselves, right? And so there's generational trauma, right? The sins that carry on to the generation until the generation, or whatever, however you want to phrase it, if we want to use biblical language. But like for parents to begin to heal as well, and maybe for like partners to start telling each other that, right? And for kids to start telling their parents, like parents to start telling their parents, so that grandparents are believing it. Just telling a kid, right? Like teens are going to see through the crap, through the BS, and so if I go and affirm a kid every day that they're the beloved of God, and then they say, yeah, but you don't believe that about yourself, like that's going to cut deeper. They're not going to ever believe that I mean it.
Right.
And yeah, it's hard to believe. I think it's one of the hardest things that Jesus teaches is that your enemy is the beloved of God. And then harder than that is that you are too. It might be easier to believe that your enemy is beloved than for us sometimes.
Meredith Miller is one of my favorite children's ministers, and her pedagogy and her theology is so well developed. And she talks about how when we teach Bible stories to kids, we are often mostly concerned with behavior modification. And so we read those stories and we say, so be brave like so-and-so, or so thank God and be grateful like this person, or something like that. And instead, it's better, especially with children's spirituality and where they are in their brain development, how they understand the world, is to focus on God and see how God followed through on God's promises, and see how God was trustworthy in this story, and see how God forgave this person. And I'm like, that's such good advice for all of us. We all need to focus. There is no one worth emulating in the Bible besides Jesus. And the point of all of those stories isn't to modify our behavior so that we're lovable. It's to show God's character of love that is inherent and true regardless of what our behavior is. And that is a much more powerful motivator for transformation than anxiety and shame, which are always paralyzing. We will always be more motivated by love. I talk to college students about it as self-fulfilling prophecy, where if we believe it about ourselves, it oftentimes comes to fruition. And so if we believe we're inherently bad, we're going to perform that even when we don't want to. And if we believe we're inherently good, inherently beloved, we are going to live like that's true, and that's going to transform the way we interact with other people and treat ourselves, of course.
Yeah. There is I think a fine line where one of the most beautiful things I think about the Christian faith is that it is honest about the brokenness in the world and the brokenness within ourselves. But I think we take that and so easily turn it away from belovedness and toward like, you deserve death, you deserve bad things, you are terrible, when like in reality it's like, well, actually no, we need to invite our teens and our entire church in to holding that both of the things are equally true, that we are broken people and we live in a broken world, and we are wholly loved and beloved by God. And I feel like it's hard for us to hold those things, but that's like the crux of the Christian faith, literally. Crux, get it? Latin.
When isn't it like literally for our brains, you have to have 7 positive things to outdo one negative thing, right? So like one negative experience with a person happens, and they would have to do 7 positive things with you, to you, etc., for you to let go of the one negative. Like, yeah, like we're like 7 times saying like, you're loved, and then one time being like, you're terrible. And it's like, well, I'm going to remember that one. That one hit really hard. Yeah. And actually people only tell me that. So yeah,
exactly. As we've been talking about the way that young people move through adolescence into college, I want to also talk about how the transition out of college looks and how that may actually be affected by things as early as what they were learning in youth group 14, 15, 16. So I'm wondering, what advice do you have for college ministers, university life professionals, and even youth ministers as they're preparing their teens to go to college, but then also to graduate from college? Like, how do ministers help prepare college students for faith beyond college?
I think that's for you guys to answer. No. I can say what was helpful for me was having specifically professors who invited, I've kind of already said this with parents, but who invited my questions and encouraged me to be okay with not having answers. And then being like really diligent about following up with me, because they could see that I was 20 years old and wanted an answer. I can think of several, like 3 professors in particular who I would be in their office or have lunch with them or something on campus, and I would just be asking question after question after question, and I didn't get an answer once from any of the 3. And all they said were like, these are really good questions. You should keep asking them. And I remember being frustrated as a 20-year-old and really grateful as a 25-year-old that they didn't say, great question, here's what to think.
Right.
Great question, here's the best answer. That it was an invitation to like a continual journey of becoming, because the answer that I had at 21 to the same question evolved at 25 and is different now at 30. Or has expanded or has gotten more inclusive or bigger or bolder or sometimes harder, like sometimes more paradoxical. And I think as a 20-year-old, if a professor had given me the answer or a campus minister had given me the answer, I would have held as tight to that as I was to the stuff before, like before the question. And then it would have made whatever questions came later in life just as hard to deal with.
Right.
And so I think that was the biggest gift I was given, was permission to ask and permission to sit in the discomfort, to then recognize that those questions were ever evolving because I was too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, since you also work with college students at times, you've taught classes and chapels and things like that. What are some of the similarities and differences that you notice between the things that high school students bring to you and the things college students brings to you when it comes to faith? And that includes some of those questions about faith, but also the things that they just take really seriously, that they are most interested in. You talked about kind of the transition from black and white thinking to having more capacity for the nuance, for the gray. What do you notice between high school and college?
I think I notice that the depth of the questions, and this is not a knock on high schoolers, but the depth of the questions it gets deeper as specifically college students are experiencing a bigger world, right? Your world bubble of high school and maybe the other high schools you interact with because you're in band or in choir or what, and you're going to these different things, versus college where now you have friends from all across the world. Maybe you've gone abroad and you've experienced another culture. And so I think the questions get deeper, but the surface levels, like the core of what is being asked, I think is the same. It's a search for authenticity. Who am I in light of an ever-changing world? I think it's a search for like genuine joy. And so like the wrestling of like what makes me happy. And for me with high school and college students, getting them kind of to let go of happiness and being like joy is different. When it comes to faith specifically, I think the question that I hear from older high schooler students and college students together is, does this make sense anymore? Is this worth it anymore? As the world gets, like as Christianity specifically gets used, weaponized, that is a question that I feel like I hear from my older high school students of like, screw this. Like, this is so stupid. Even at camp last week, like kids who show up to camp for the purpose of like Christian teaching and worship, also being like, and we go back down the mountain and everyone hates Christians because they're screwing it up. And so like the invitation of like, can you see a more beautiful faith? Can you recognize a more beautiful imagination for what your role could be? I feel like that is present. Yeah. And I mean, there's specifically from women, like young women, I think the different social concerns of, and I will preface this to say like, the reason I said only young women is because like I do see a shift in young men that is moving less concerned with climate, less concerned with justice for everyone, and more concerned with like the self. I do see that shift in older college men and a little bit in my younger middle school guys. So I see the oldest men on this spectrum that we're talking about and the youngest ones being in a similar brain space of like, it's all about me, because you've so deprioritized me for so long. And I'm like, well, interesting. To have a 21-year-old and a 11-year-old thinking the same about the world, but that's a different conversation. But so, yeah, I say that to say like, I hear from young women concerned about LGBTQ inclusion, concerned about the environment, concerned about racial reconciliation and justice, concerned about genocides around the world. And I don't hear that as much from young men. So I think that's fascinating.
That's really interesting. I think a lot of people who are listening to this podcast now, they probably can't do anything about what they experienced in youth group or about what their kids experienced in youth group. So what advice do you have for college students to reconnect with their faith when they feel disoriented, disappointed, disconnected from their faith in college, if they have not been given the tools to launch into college well and wrestle with some of those spiritual questions?
I would give the advice that you need to trust that everything along your journey actually has some use for you. And I'm going to do something I don't like to do, but take a Bible verse out of context little bit.
We encourage.
We do not encourage.
Kind of. I do think this is actually the point of this, but it's just kind of weird on its own. Like in 1 Corinthians, when Paul talks about let no one boast about human leaders, for all things are yours, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or life or death or the world or rulers or whatever he talks about. He goes off to list all these different things and says, but all things are yours because you belong to Christ and Christ belongs to God. And so I think the stuff that you were given that's not good can be not good and can form you into becoming a person who's more gracious and more peaceful and more joyful and more loving in a world that needs it.
Yeah.
I think the encouragement would be, don't believe that because others screwed up, that this story isn't worth trusting still. That you can step into a story that's been written well before those people screwed up and is going to be written well after other people screw up. And that you get to play a role in this chapter right here, right now, so that other people go, oh, resurrection's a possibility. That's an actual present reality. Okay, I can get behind that. So trust that you've got it all and that all things are already yours.
Yeah,
I love that.
That's beautiful. What gives you hope when you think about this generation's faith, even if the college years are pretty messy?
I think the willingness to show up for the other in a life stage that could be very selfish. And I'm thinking high schoolers as well, but yeah, with college students, that there is a desire, from what I see and from what I hear, to heal the world by caring for, showing up for, and carrying the burdens of others while knowing we have all of our own stuff to deal with. I think that gives me hope because I don't feel like my generation did that very well. I feel like we tried, got burnt out, and gave up. And this generation doesn't feel like they're willing to give up yet. And I think the people above them, like millennials, I feel like we gave up a little bit, and at least I shouldn't speak for the whole generation. I feel a little guilty that I gave up on some things. And so I'm motivated to help them not give up. And the questions that 17-year-olds are asking are brilliant. The questions that 20-year-olds are asking are brilliant. Questions that I didn't sit with until I was in my mid to late 20s, I feel like. And so I think just the overall openness to difference, to diversity, to perspectives that contrast with what they want and think is encouraging, gives me hope. And I think whoever the first Gen Z global leaders are, I think they're going to do a kick-ass job. And so, because I think we can see what they're doing now, and that's just a small picture of what a bigger job they will do when they have more say, when their voices are listened to more. And I think it would be better now if we would just listen to them more, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Is there anything that we haven't asked you about or that you want to say that you're just come on guys, get it together. Ask me this thing.
No, but if there's any youth ministers listening to this, start reading books about adolescent faith formation. The Spiritual Child by Lisa Miller, stellar.
Excellent.
Well, Joel, thank you so much for this conversation, for the ways that your ministry has encouraged myself and Falon, and also for infusing a challenging topic with hope, encouragement, and practical ways to move forward with equipping our teens and young adults for a faith that is thriving. We really appreciated having you on the podcast.
Thanks. It was fun.
Thanks, Joel. Appreciate it.